Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Christiana Best, host and creator of the podcast Inside Out, Outside In. This podcast was developed for and by colleges and universities. It is guided by the themes of diversity, inclusion, and equity. The goal of the podcast is to educate, inform, build community, and inspire change while centering the voices and experiences of people of color. The contents of this podcast do not represent any college or university.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Inside Out, Outside In podcast. My name is Joey Kyle-Di Pietropaolo, and I'm a graduate student currently working as an intern under Dr. Christiana Best. On this episode of the Inside Out, Outside In podcast, we are taking a look at the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy, otherwise known as DACA. So DACA has been one of the first steps for the U.S. government to try and create a supporting policy for undocumented immigrants that have lived in America for long periods of time. However, DACA is a policy that has seen a lot of contention in Congress regarding if it is a proper way of supporting undocumented immigrants or if it's not accomplishing what is actually needed by undocumented immigrants in this country. Today, I am joined by Marlon Augustin Mendez, a forensic social worker who is currently a part of the Legal Aid Society. And we're going to just sort of take a look into DACA as a policy and how it is really affecting undocumented immigrants right now. So, Marlon, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me as well. I'm super happy to have this space where we can talk and kind of look at some of the implications of DACA and how that can play out, or what we would like to see, right, play out in the among the immigrant community.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited for this opportunity too. Outside of the headlines, it really feels like there's not always a lot of conversation about DACA. So, just to sort of get a feel for where you are in the world of social work, a lot of people are familiar with what a social worker is, but what is sort of like the difference between a forensic social worker and a social worker?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, we're certainly continue to be social workers, just in the context of working within or with court involved communities. Most of my work is really around advocacy, developing psychosocial reports to then present to the courts, and really advocate for and on behalf of people that find themselves in detention. Particularly, I work with the immigration law unit. And in that practice, we service folks that are undocumented, providing them comprehensive legal support in their case to kind of help them um, out of detention and out of removal proceedings. So really kind of working in a very inter uh, relational kind of a environment with attorneys, paralegals, judges, interfacing with all these different players to really support our clients.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you do have sort of like that one-on-one client relationship that we see in a lot of different social work and therapy positions. But instead of having something along the lines of helping somebody to overcome depression or helping them to deal with something that's happening in their personal life, you're helping them in order to try and protect them from the American immigration system that's hurting them.
Yeah, and it's a good word to use, protection, because I think right now, especially given the fact that we are just getting out of a very volatile and hostile administration. We're going away from the Trump administration, was very volatile and hostile toward immigrant communities. Yes, you're right. And protection in terms of their uh, unjust pieces to the immigration legal system, and we're trying to kind of make it a little more just. But you're right. Yeah, I think even though we don't provide your typical clinical support, we do provide a lot of supportive counseling for folks
Mhm.
that are in detention. They are under an immense amount of stress. A lot of folks in their process of their immigration process has been very traumatic in many instances. So we see a lot of mental health concerns rise up,
Mhm.
and we are the trained professionals to help kind of mitigate that and really connect the lines for attorneys to understand a little bit more about the mental health aspect of a person.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the huge things to take note of, because a lot of times when people think of a social worker, they're not thinking about the people who are out there analyzing DACA policy, analyzing ICE actions and things like that, in order to try and figure out how to help people who are currently detained, how to get them the rights that they need in order to be able to thrive in our country. They really are thinking of like the one-on-one clinical work, but there really is so much more going on in the field of social work, where there's a lot of different options depending on who the clients are and what effort really needs to be made in order to properly support them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I was talking about before, there are a lot of people in America who have heard of DACA before, have seen it on the news and things like that, but don't really have an understanding of what DACA is as a policy. So, I was hoping that maybe we could just sort of discuss that a little bit, talk about like some of the basics of DACA, who it affects, etc.
Sure. Yeah, you want me to go first?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. If you
okay.
want to go ahead.
Yeah. So the DACA program was initiated by under the Obama administration in June of 2012. Um, and this is really kind of like a response to countless efforts that were made to get or yeah, to get a comprehensive immigration reform, something that could be set as a bill, could be posed as a law. Unfortunately, ever since I think it was around 2010 when the first Dream Act presented, um, that Dream Act, we all kind of, and I say we all because I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to kind of self-disclose a little bit, but I am a DACA recipient. So, I think there's an element of a personal element to it as well. So when in 2010, as early as I can remember, there was a proposed bill, a Dream Act, which it was known as, that would really kind of provide a pathway to citizenship for um, hundreds of thousands of undocumented folks like myself who entered the U.S. while we were very young, and really kind of acculturated, integrated ourselves into society, and really wanted to kind of start a life like anyone else. However, in 2010 and then in consecutive years, those proposed bills never passed. So in 2012, I think it was like a response by the Obama administration, seeing that there was no progress, uh, which then led to this implementation of the DACA program, Deferred
Yeah.
Action for Childhood Arrivals program.
And I think that's one of the really important things to sort of note when it comes to like looking at DACA as like a policy and an idea, is that DACA isn't a law. It hasn't been voted on by Congress or state representatives or anything like that. It was originally put in as a presidential memorandum, correct?
Correct.
Towards the end of the Obama administration. So it's something that we could see easily turned over by a different political organization. For example, we saw Trump towards the middle of his presidency really trying to come in and stop DACA. But the courts held him back about it, said that it was such an essential part of America right now that we couldn't just take it away without filling its hole with something else.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. No. Totally. I think really the Trump administration uh, showed us the fragility of DACA, of the DACA program, how it can be taken away. You're right. It's not a law. It's only a protection from deportation. And because it's not a law, because it's not a pathway to citizenship, recipients, DACA recipients, um, can encounter mental health concerns, can encounter concerns for the future, because it's a contingent upon whatever political climate is at play in that time. Actually, one of the things that we kind of focused on, and when I say we, is Dr. Jessica Rosenberg, Dr. Sally Robles, Emma Cathlo, and Astrid, who we kind of all met through an internship. We came together and researched, made research or conducted research rather, um, to really a qualitative approach to understanding the lived experiences of DACA recipients, especially amidst the Trump administration and the implications that posed.
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, the people who are recipients of DACA have a lot more fragile of protections in comparison to, say, permanent residents. So those who have received green cards and things like that.
Right.
For DACA recipients, at maximum, you have 2 years on any given thing before you have to sort of, oh, what's the word for it? Oh, one sec.
Renew.
Yeah, renew. That's it. Yeah, before you have to renew your policy, as opposed to people with green cards who only have to renew every 10 plus years,
Right.
depending on the situation.
Yeah.
In addition, there's a lot of rights that DACA recipients don't get in comparison to recipients of green cards, correct?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, just I think one of the biggest things is that peace of mind that you don't ever have to worry about the future. Um, and I'm not saying that green card holders or any other kind of visa, you folks that hold these certain privileges don't ever have to worry. I'm sure they do because there's a lot of changes in immigration law. But I think with DACA recipients, that fragility again, right? To only know that you're safe for 2 years. And even under the Trump administration, there was another memorandum that was because Trump wasn't unable to kind of completely close out the program. There were changes made, um, and actually limited back to 1 year. So there was only a period of time that DACA recipients were eligible for 1 year protections, and so that even created a lot of chaos among the community. Good thing under it's changed, and now we're getting all the provisions that the DACA program had originally. But yeah, that's just a concern. Some other, um, I guess, benefits that DACA recipients don't have are like ability to uh, obtain federal funds for school, for college, um, the ability to travel outside of the United States. There is something called advanced parole, which you basically ask immigration that permission to leave the country for humanitarian purposes, educational or employment purposes. It's a very short span of time, but then you're going to have to come back in. And even then, when you come back in, you are subject to kind of like a review of whether you're eligible to come back in or not. So yeah, there's certain rights that the DACA program uh, does not have as much protection as other visa holders.
And these are things that the average American absolutely takes for granted. So the fact that you can't leave the country,
Mhm.
that's huge. You can't even go to, say, Canada just for like a vacation or anything like that. But then the other one, which is just extremely dire right now, is the fact that they can't receive federal aid for education. With the education costs for higher education rising every single year, I mean, when my parents went to school, it was, $5,000 a semester. Me going to school right now is $50,000 a semester. It's multiplied by 10. And how are you supposed to be able to go and get an education when not only are you not receiving federal aid, but you don't know how long you're actually going to be allowed to stay in the country in order to be able to finish your degree?
Yeah,
So
and I think that that's a really classic example of how policy influences behavior.
mhm.
Um, at least for me, and this is just kind of in my own experience, was that under the Trump administration, I remember that there were efforts to rescind DACA. And in those moments, I was graduating with my bachelor's, and I was like, yeah, I could go into the workforce, but what if the DACA program is completely, rescinded? What if it's no longer uh, in place? So that kind of propelled me to kind of finish my master's quick, but at the same time, it even though it was a good step forward, there was a lot of questions around, yeah, how am I going to pay that? I'm not eligible for federal loans, so it certainly influences behavior, I think, in many ways. Again, a classic example of how policy influences human behavior, and how we as social workers tap into that mindfulness that policies around us do influence human behavior.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about today with you was what sort of things can schools do in order to be able to support DACA recipients? Because they're in such a fragile situation with where they're able to stay, how much funding they have, on top of just the trauma of being an undocumented immigrant in today's America. What are some things that schools are doing or can do in order to sort of better help people?
Sure, I think that's a great question. I think there's been a lot of advancements in what colleges and schools are doing, in terms of creating. I know, for example, the CUNY system, City University of New York system, has what's called the Dream Teams, which are spaces where DACA recipients kind of gather together with allies and kind of find a safe space to discuss, talk about what's happening, and find resources. Um, but I think at a larger level, I think colleges and universities are still kind of unaware, um, not informed of really what DACA is.
Mhm.
I remember I did a presentation at a college, and I had folks come after the presentation was over, approached me and kind of like we were talking about my presentation. They were like, "Well, you don't have to worry now. You have DACA and everything's good." Well, no, not everything's good, because DACA is so fragile; it can be taken at any time. So I think that there's I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's not as much information being divulged at the higher levels in terms of financial offices. There's still, like, some colleges are still asking for social security numbers, and this is kind of moving outside of the context of DACA, but there are still hundreds of folks that were unable to get DACA protection, that are undocumented in every sense of the way. I think there's a certain level of privilege for DACA recipients. I acknowledge that. I hold a level of privilege, whereas my respective peer might be completely undocumented and not have a social security number. So yeah, colleges might still need to be educated, can still be informed of the different experiences that immigrant communities, even DACA recipients, have, to create more spaces, more opportunities, I think, for students
Yeah.
with these experiences.
Yeah. And what I'm really feeling from this situation is that there needs to be not only a level of support sort of put in our institutions, but also like more flexibility in how the institution functions in terms of everything from, organizational structure to paperwork. Because as we were talking about, undocumented immigrants don't have social security numbers, and that's required for some parts of school paperwork, you
Mm,
know
mm,
or in other situations, when you go to the financial aid office at your average college and you go to them to talk about how you're going to be able to pay for your degree, their first response is, well, have you filled out federal financial aid?
yeah,
And there's so many people where that's not even an option, you
right,
know?
right, right.
Um, and then they at once you give them that sort of, I can't apply for federal financial aid, their response is sort of like, well, you kind of got to figure it out. At least that was my experience in college when I was going and asking for scholarships, was their response was, hey, you got to kind of go figure it out. So, I can just imagine this happening with, all numbers of undocumented immigrants across the country.
Yeah, or the other question that can kind of proceed from that would be, well, why not?
Hmm.
And I think there are certain people that are comfortable with revealing this identity, right? Undocumented, with DACA recipients, and some that aren't, because it's been traumatic. So even at that level, right? Just to have the comfortableness of
Mhm.
naming their current situation, their experience, might not be possible. So in that conversation, well, why not? The student could very well say, you know what, I just can't, and then just like walk away and just like, okay, that's it, you know. And there are some folks that find it a lot easier than others. Now, I do also want to say that these realities are more uh, predominant in states that aren't as progressive. I would like to say, I think New York has made a lot of advances. There has been a lot of state level funding for DACA recipients and things like that. But outside, there's other states, there's other areas of our country that um, are not there yet, and I think we need to get there. I think we need to reach out to those places, those
Yeah.
deserts of support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to reach out to them because, nowadays you need an education to do almost anything. The first one of the first questions on your resume, when you're applying for any job, is what's your educational background? Do you have your GED? Do you have, a bachelor's in something like that? And there's so many jobs which you can't get without a specific education. And if we're not able to accept more people into the education system, the more the more restricted people are in how they're able to take care of themselves and live their lives.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I also think that it's about validation too. It's about
Mhm.
validating the inherent dignity and worth of a person. Like I am worthy. I am able to study at the college that I want to, that I feel that I have the capacity to study at. And I think that it really goes down to that too. I I remember after high school, I wasn't really thinking about college. I was at that time I was undocumented. DACA program was not established, so I was working in restaurants, and I remember cleaning this. In restaurants, there's this sewage compartment where like everything is kind of filtered through, and every
Yep,
now and
yep. In the dish pit, I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah.
I've worked a few kitchens myself.
Right, right. No, exactly. And I was in there, I was like cleaning, and I was like thinking to myself, and this is something I said, I think this is the pinnacle of what I'm going to get to. And it was coming to terms with that. And it's hard sometimes to kind of think back on those moments because I wasn't validated for what I could be. And it wasn't because I couldn't at the time. I believed I couldn't, but it was because there was policies in place that didn't allow me to.
Mhm,
And again, with the DACA program, those policies, even though they're not, the most effective and the most well developed policies, it's still something that does provide some support. Uh,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some things that students can do to support their undocumented friends and potentially even classmates?
Sure. Yeah, I think it'd be good to get informed, like wherever college, university, that these spaces that you are involved with, uh, be informed if there is a dream team, if there is a support group. If not, how can allies come together to and work with the DACA recipients to form spaces, to create spaces, right? I think also in terms of right now, educating folks about the Dream and Promise Act, which has passed House of Representatives, and will now be kind of in the Senate. And the Dream and Promise Act is a bill that could potentially solve the issue of the DACA program being fragile, right? Now it would be a pathway to citizenship. So students can, garner support for that. Students can uh, provide lobby for that. Can whatever I think there's many roles that a student or allies can play in helping the DACA community.
Yeah, yeah. That was very similar to what I was thinking too, because I remember back when I was doing my undergraduate degree, which actually seems to be about the same time you were doing your undergraduate degree. Um, it lined up kind of funny like that. I remember the importance at our school of the program they had to support first generation students,
Okay.
because before that program, they were having a large problem being able to retain first generation students for a variety of reasons. And the thing that they did, which really supported them and sort of helped to mitigate for some of the different factors of being a first generation student, was putting a mentorship policy, mentorship program into place, putting a first generation student club into place. So this was a place where people could meet every month in order to talk with other first generation students and just like get a feeling for what else is going on at the college, get an understanding of, what other people are experiencing, so that way they have some support with other people and things like that. So when I was thinking about this, I thought, my first response was like, oh man, like if we could get, clubs together, get that social network going, like I feel like that's definitely something that a lot of students are capable of doing in like modern higher education culture.
Yeah, no, yeah, that resonates with me because there's actually a lot of um organizations and kind of yeah, organizations that are kind of doing this work.
Mhm.
There's I know the Undocumented Professional network is organization that lives on the internet through Instagram and Facebook, but they connect um DACA recipients who have gone through the educational system, are professionals, and kind of want to give back to their community and mentor a DACA recipient that is currently going through the educational process. So I think students can, reach out to these organizations. Colleges can also reach out to these organizations to kind of garner support. I don't know. I think, there could be a lot of collaboration between community-based organizations and higher institutions of higher education.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, oh, absolutely. I am in total agreement with you on that. And, you know, nowadays it's so easy to get connected with other people. We have the internet, we have emails and stuff. And honestly, just the amount of data that schools already collect about students, they usually have the information to go, oh, like you might want to reach out to this person, or maybe there could be like specified people at the school to reach out for specifically for DACA support,
Mhm.
you know?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I wanted to also sort of give a picture to students who might be listening to this podcast, who might be inspired to try and become social workers in order to support DACA recipients. And one of the ways that I wanted to do that is I wanted to talk a little bit about how social workers support DACA recipients and what sort of is the path to like get to that point where you are supporting DACA recipients as a social worker.
Yeah, I think there's many roles that a social worker can take. You have the clinical uh, route or the clinical track, right? Where the profession really needs um, social workers. Sorry, my watch is going on. Can you hear that?
Oh yeah, yeah, you're good. You can just go
Okay.
ahead and just grab
Yeah.
it, and
Yeah.
then Dr.
Yeah.
Best will just cut right there, and then
Sorry about that.
no, it's all good. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I can start again. So there's the clinical route, right? Where social workers can um, work with DACA recipients, immigrant communities through the mental health aspect, really kind of providing that support, that space to address the traumas, the um, uh, different forms of mental health concerns that arise due to these experiences of being subject to um, policies, institutions that are fundamentally aggressive toward immigrant communities. There's also the track for or roles that social worker could play in terms of policy practitioner, kind of looking at the policies that exist for DACA recipients, for immigrant communities, for any of these community immigrant communities, and how we can develop policy that one addresses all needs, but also two is more geared toward the achievement of social justice, right? The achievement of equitable uh, world, I think, essentially. Um, so the social worker could also provide legal support in terms of like forensic social worker, right? Uh, Helping undocumented immigrants, DACA recipients navigate the um, the legal realm, which is already confusing as it is. And I think that that's also I think there's many different roles. Community organizing, I think, is also important. Community development, um, social workers providing services in the educational context, right? I think there's so many different things that social workers can and are getting involved in.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and it's so important to note that being a social worker supporting DACA recipients doesn't mean that on one side you don't need a law degree all the time, right? You can be an MSW or
Yes,
even a BSW sometimes, and you can get out there and support these people.
sure.
And then it's also just so huge that on the other side, it doesn't mean that you're always doing just, one-on-one counseling work,
Yeah.
helping with like direct mental crisis and mental health and all of that. There's advocacy routes that you can take. There's grant writing routes that you can take.
Mm.
Heck, I've met social workers that all they do is they write grants
Yeah.
in these
Yeah.
situations. Uh, or maybe at the end of the day you are just sort of like that support person who can help get people where they need to be you
Mhm.
know
It really talks about the versatility of the social work profession,
Hmm.
uh, the different fields of practice that we can be involved in,
Yeah.
and we have the capacity as social workers to be involved in. Right? There's social work profession is versatile and is
Hmm.
very much needed in our day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with you on that one. And it's just sometimes when we are looking at social work as a profession, we really just get caught up on, what we see in the media as like social workers and therapists, the long white couch, like the button-up shirts and the suits and like, oh, and how does that make you feel? But social work has so much more to it. Just like you said, there's so many other things that you can do, and sometimes you just have to look for it. That might be changing the school that you were originally going to go to. Social work schools, some of them specialize in doing clinical work, working one-on-one with clients, but there's also schools out there where you take on more of a political science role
Mhm.
and you really are doing mostly advocacy work.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even um there's work that needs to be done in terms of presenting the social work profession among the immigrant community. Sometimes um there are certain uh, lived experiences where social work isn't really something that people have grown around, a social
Mhm.
worker or the idea of a social worker. So kind of even just that, just presenting the work of a social work professional and what they can do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, that goes right in with, there's a lot of undocumented immigrants out there who are really afraid to accept help because, some of them are afraid that they'll get arrested if they accept help, that if they call the wrong number, the police are going to come and get them, right?
Yeah.
So being able to have things that immigrants are able to take a look at and see like, oh well, here are the things that I can do in order to get help, these are the people that I can go to for support, is such a huge thing. And it shows just how important it is that a social worker is part of the community in order to be able to get that information out.
Right, right. Yeah, I think immigrant communities are by historically have been um underserved communities have it, it's always been said that undocumented immigrants live in the shadows, really kind of not try to expose themselves, not trying to expose ourselves to really be looked at and kind of like exposed for lack of a better word. because there are repercussions, there are legal repercussions for someone being undocumented living in the United States, and I see that daily. There's clients that were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were approached by immigration ICE officers, and now they find themselves detained. It's yeah, we still live in a time where being undocumented and having a job and providing for your family, working two jobs, paying your taxes is still a crime because you don't
Mhm.
hold a piece of paper.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a shame. Um, but luckily, as you were talking a little bit about before, there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. There is some talk about the Biden administration trying to put in some more permanent policies as an option, as a pathway for permanent residency for undocumented immigrants. Hmm.
Yeah, there sure is. I think one of the ones that have garnered a lot of support, and I think one of the things with DACA particularly is that it has garnered a lot of support. There is a lot of consensus on both sides of the aisle about the willingness to provide protections, a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients. Uh, and it's a little shameful to say, but it's because they're we're seen as more um, uh, what's the correct word, as more deserving.
Hmm.
uh, it's probably not the best way to think about it, but in reality, that's a lot of folks believe that. Whereas other immigrant sub, communities, other immigrant communities that aren't DACA recipients, are sometimes seen as not deserving of protections and pathways to citizenship. So I think the Biden administration is trying to find a way to collectively, not contingent upon whether you're a DACA recipient or not, just offering comprehensive immigration reform to uh, the hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants that reside in the United States.
Yeah. And I know that's something that me and you and a whole bunch of other people are worried about, is that this policy just isn't going to reach the amount of people that it needs to.
Mhm,
Because that's a problem that we've seen with DACA. There's, hundreds and thousands of people who aren't even close to applicable for DACA, who might have been here for decades.
mhm, mhm,
And the only way to sort of fix that situation is to come in with a replacement policy that would be more encompassing of different amounts of people.
mhm, mhm,
So yeah. And it's just, once again, it's just right now with DACA, nobody knows how long it's going to last. At least there's a little bit of hope that with the Biden administration, it's at least going to last for the next 3 years, because the nobody in the Biden administration has really said like we're looking to remove DACA and not replace it. Um, so at least there's a little bit of hope that the next 3 years there'll be something in place that will at least reach a couple people. But like this next policy that the Biden administration is trying to pass through the House with the Democrats and the Republicans, it really needs to be something that it encompasses the large amount of people that we have undocumented here in America, and all of the different diversity that we have in the American undocumented population.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that the end goal is to find a way, a comprehensive way to include all immigrant communities
Hmm.
across the board. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, well, thank you once again for coming on today, Marlon. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate your work. You're doing something that is huge right now in the field of social work, especially in New York City. And just thanks again for offering your input. I feel like this is a absolutely wonderful conversation about what's sort of going on. And, I look forward to hearing about the rest of your work.
No,
So.
thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and also thank you to Dr. Best, who is an inspiration as well. This podcast is wonderful. I have listened to some of the recordings, and it's great. It's great to have this space And yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, you know what? Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening us today on the Inside Out, Outside In podcast. We look forward to you listening in on some of our other episodes. Have a nice day and good luck to you all. And then